So Sir Ken Robinson said, school kills creativity, and I get that a lot. People have seen that TED Talk clearly. I say school does not kill creativity. Parents kill creativity. Because there are some extremely creative people in the world, and they also went to school, didn't they? I learned the Icelandic word for curious. Do you know what it is? So it's totally different from the English word. It's forvitten. For means before, witten means to know. So curious in Icelandic means that which comes before knowledge. Isn't that extremely profound? So the Icelandic have this thing about before knowledge. But in Bulgarian, the word for curious is lupitten. And it loosely or poetically translates to the love of asking questions, which is a totally different word for curious, but it's equally interesting. So I went to my mom and said, I want to raise creative children. I'm an expert on creativity. I'm the creativity explorer. I don't know anything about kids. You've seen 100,000 kids. How do I raise a creative child? And she said this: never give the answer. When a child comes to you and asks you a question, don't give the answer. Every parent wants to give the answer. Every teacher gives the answer. Just don't give the answer. Just say, what do you think? That's the best advice I ever got as a parent. Creativity is not asking questions. Creativity is asking questions and finding the answer.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are delighted to have you with us for this wonderful, thought-provoking, probing, prompting, prodding conversation that we're about to have. One that we've tried to have, but diaries, technical glitches and lots of different things have just got in the way, but one we've been excited to have for months and months and months. So before we dive into our guests that you can see on screen, or if you're not watching, you'll be about to hear from. But Ben, before we do so, tell us a bit about your week, mate. How do we do this? This is an interesting thing. Ben always does this to me. You're on mute. But how do we do this without giving the game away of when we're recording? How do we talk about our week without talking about our week?
Well, I can talk about interesting things.
Great Christmas. Did you have a good Christmas and a good summer and a good spring? And it was great to see the Easter Bunny, wasn't it, Ben? All at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
well, we had. I'll tell you about something, and somebody might be able to age it. And if that is the case, that is the case. I was really privileged to be invited to the Future AI Readiness Symposium in London with the team from Eton, convened by Uday Kemker as well, which was pretty epic. We had some people from Brown University and some others. I was invited to be involved with that, so that was a great conversation over in London. So that was great to be invited as Edufuturists to be in that space. So yeah, that was possibly one of the highlights.
I got a million excited messages of, look who I am, look on the here. And I was like, I had FOMO, absolutely. But it was great that Ben was representing the ideas guy and obviously us as Edufuturists. So it's great for one of us to be there, absolutely. But yeah, good week, can't complain. Weather needs to be better. But to be fair, it always needs to be better in the UK. So that gives nothing away. I could say hailstone in, that could be Christmas or could be May. You never know. So yeah. But shall we dive in? Fredrik, I know that you've been sat patiently. Do you want to introduce yourself, your background and your experience in education?
Yeah, so I define myself as the creativity explorer. I spent 25 years studying human creativity, and my kind of niche is that I do it around the world. So basically my job is to go around and interview creative people. I have a good job.
And is it the world, or is it just that little globe that's sat behind you?
The globe is here in my office to remind myself that I need to have a global mindset. I do a lot of the interviews from here, though. I do a lot of Zoom interviews as well. You don't. Maybe 10-20% is on Zoom. I don't. It works brilliantly now, but I also want to travel. At least I want to travel.
Yeah, and I know that you have kind of said a lot within a short period of time there, Fredrik, in regards to what does that creativity to you in terms of that spectrum, but also what I'm interested in when you say I explore it around the world, is that every single day? Is that every single week? What does that look like in terms of a format and a
I would say so. I live on an island outside Stockholm, and I spend about roughly 50-60% on the island, and that's where I do my writing and my thinking. And then the rest of the time I travel. So I go to between 15 and 35 countries every year. And I make deliberately sure that I go everywhere between. I go from North Korea to South Korea and everything in between. So, I want to go to Bangladesh and Nigeria and South Africa, and I also want to go to Silicon Valley and Germany and Singapore. So I interview all kinds of people, all kinds of industries, all kinds of cultures, all kinds of countries, because I want to understand human creativity from every aspect.
So it would be absolutely remiss of us right now to not mention, from our perspective, I think for almost everybody who would be listening to this podcast, and our community of people will be super familiar with one of those legendary TED Talks from the brilliant Sir Ken Robinson about whether schools kill creativity. And I know that, interestingly, that there's lots of other influential things around creativity. But I wonder whether you could, in a nutshell, give us a little bit of what you found in terms of what creativity looks like, having been in all those countries that you've been in. And I know that we're going to talk about your book about the world of creativity, but also tell us a little bit about what is creativity, and are schools killing it?
Well, let's start there, and let's give an unexpected answer to get some energy into the conversation. Yeah, so Sir Ken Robinson said school kills creativity, and I get that a lot. People have seen that TED Talk clearly. I say school does not kill creativity. Parents kill creativity, because there are some extremely creative people in the world, and they also went to school, didn't they? So if they can still be creative, even though when they went through the same school as everyone else did, then maybe it isn't the school, maybe it's the parents. And I think it's, and I like to ask I ask people, I've asked over 1 million people about how they look at their own creativity. And almost no one says that they think they're doing enough to develop their creativity. So my first message to people who say I'm not creative because I think school killed it is that, well, are you doing enough? You're not in school anymore. You're an adult now. Are you doing enough to develop your creativity? And everyone says, no, maybe I'm not. Maybe I should. Yeah, maybe you should. It's your own responsibility. Don't blame school for everything that's wrong in the world.
Agreed. Can I just jump in that first? Because I think a couple of bits just to come in, and then there's all them studies, and not necessarily, I know there's some issues around the validity of some of the studies around when students start school and then when they end school, and about the amount of questions they ask and all the other bits that go with that. Also there's also that we recently talked about at a presentation we did, and we shared it on socials, around Horace Mann as the father of American education, who developed this factory model that with bells and conveyor belts, actually homeschooled his own children. So interestingly, my thought process there into what you're saying about whether it's parents or whether it's individuals, and not schools, we have got that model where even the father of American education, that we, as we see now, didn't follow the practice. So perhaps he thought that schools weren't a great thing for his own kids.
I have homeschooled my kids. I have put them in international school and I put them in government school. I've tried all, and both my parents were teachers. So I think when it comes, it all depends on the teacher that you had. Right? School can be the most amazing creativity catalyst in the world if you get the right teacher, and it can definitely kill it if you have the wrong teacher. That is for sure. I just today I was driving my kids to school, and they told me they have a graduation 2 weeks from now. She's graduating from 6th grade, right? The last primary school, and they're going to sing a song. And all the kids in the class said they want to sing this song, which was a song about like saying goodbye. And the teacher says, no, you can't sing that song. It's not summerly enough. And so why on earth should the teachers decide what song the kids sing at their own graduation? Like, come on, just let them pick a song, unless it's offensive.
I think that's really interesting. I think maybe it's just what me and Ben have been exploring, obviously, and goes into the book, that whole thing of school doesn't, parents don't, learners don't. Actually, it's all very a personal bit that actually school can disengage. Education can switch on or switch off. Parents can switch on, switch off. But ultimately, is it circumstance, and is it that ability to actually see and bring to light what creativity means to an individual, the context they're in, and where they sit and what they want to explore? Because I don't feel I'm that creative. Ben is more of a marketeer, I would say, in terms of that stuff and all. But actually, I've learned that my creativity is something very, very different, and is specific to me in terms of my thought process. I had a wonderful conversation that Ben doesn't know because it's only happened this morning with my 5-year-old daughter. And we were driving to school, and I always just say, "Oh, what you must expect her." She's really excited for PE. She loves PE now. She didn't, and as an ex-PE teacher, I love the fact that she loves PE. And she also said, "But you know, I've got my I've got my activity today on my lunch study." And I said, "What does your activity? What do you mean by your activity then, Ella?" And she went, I do mindfulness now, Daddy." And she said, and she'd chosen, and I was like, "What?" I said, "Mindfulness." And I was like, "Wow." I said, "That's brilliant." I said, what do you do in that?" So she taught me exactly what she did. And I went, "Oh," I said, "Is that something that the teachers make you do?" And she went, No, there was a list of 10 or 15 things that I could do, and I get to do it twice a week. And I picked mindfulness. I had no idea she'd done that. It was nothing to do with me. My world is exploding. But I was like, through choice selection and actually allowing a 5-year-old to make her own decisions, she's decided that that's what creativity and what her fun and her learning should look like this week.
Yeah, and it should be more of that, right? Definitely more of that. I was just in Iceland recently, and I got like actually I would call it an epiphany, because I learned about the Icelandic word for curious. I like to say that I think Ben, you were saying like how do I look at creativity? And I like to say that if there's one thing, if you want to be more creative, if there's one thing you need to do, you need to develop your curiosity, because curiosity is by far the biggest trigger to creativity. So then when the question becomes, how do we trigger our curiosity? And so I actually have this in my book, but I was in Iceland recently. I learned the Icelandic word for curious. Do you know what it is? So it's totally different from the English word. It's forvitten. For means before, witten means to know. So curious in Icelandic means that which comes before knowledge. Isn't that extremely profound?
Yeah, so cool.
And when I heard that, I said, "Oh my God, the number one job of a teacher is to trigger the curiosity of a child, because you cannot learn anything unless you're first curious about what you want to know. And if you are curious about it, you will learn until you fall dead of exhaustion, right? You just want to learn more and more." So I think that was a beautiful way of looking at the connection between learning and curiosity.
Yeah, and you've written a book, haven't you? You've written more than one book. And in terms of that, the world of creativity, that latest book in that space, that's like global insights. So you've obviously got this from Iceland. What else have you seen about creativity in the different places that you've seen? And I suppose that kind of comes into how do you develop more of that curiosity that will develop the creativity? Because I think you've just said curiosity leads to creativity. So how do we create curiosity? So, but what have we seen across the world?
Yeah, okay. We can, if we stay at curiosity for a while. So the reason I wrote the book, because I wanted to understand creativity from as many different culture perspectives as possible. So the Icelandic have this thing about before knowledge, but in Bulgarian, the word for curious is lupiten, and it loosely or poetically translates to the love of asking questions, which is a totally different word for curious, but it's equally interesting. Like, if you get people to ask questions, they are going to be curious. If they're curious, they're going to be creative. But do you know the connection between the English word curious? What's the meaning of the English word? Like the etymology.
I definitely not. Ben is a bigger thinker than I am. So you try, Ben, and I'll say no.
I'm wondering from like if it's got Latin etymology, whether it's something to do with like healing and curation and
cure. Cura is the root, but it's not healing; it's caring. So cure and curious and care has the same root, meaning that which you care about, you will be curious about.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good.
And I'll give you an example of this. My mother was a teacher, as I told you. She was a teacher for over 20 years, a normal, regular teacher. And then she reschooled herself to a Montessori teacher. And she was a Montessori teacher for 20 years. So she's tried both sides, right? And when she explained Montessori to me once, and I think it's such a beautiful way of describing it. Because at a normal school, the teacher says, today we're going to learn how to read, and then everyone reads. Montessori, the teacher goes to the one student and says, what would you like to do today? And the student says, I want to learn about dinosaurs. And the teacher says, oh, that's great. Let's read a book about dinosaurs. And then go to the next kid and ask, what would you like to do today? I would like to learn how to draw. I said, the teacher goes, that's wonderful. Let's do that. Why don't you draw a dinosaur? The teacher is still teaching them about dinosaurs, but they're doing it from what the kid wanted to learn, not what the teacher wanted them to learn. It's such a mindset shift, and it's all about triggering their own curiosity and what they care about, in this case, dinosaurs. I think it's such a beautiful way of describing the role of a teacher.
And also how curiosity, all of those kind of things around not just one thing. So yesterday is an example. I always take it back to my children. That Ollie came home. Ollie is obsessed with dinosaurs. Ollie is also obsessed with football, and Ollie is also obsessed with farms in general, and some of those bits. But yesterday we got this massive jigsaw around dinosaurs. It was enormous, but it was quite big stuff, and he was exploring that. 5 minutes later, he wanted to do something else, and he was just flipping between all of the different things. And but if I'd have just said, no, Ollie, stop, we only focus on this now, don't do that, and everything else, he would have never come back, and he would have disengaged, probably flipped over the jigsaw, because that's Ollie, yeah. and literally would have just gone, I'm triggered, I'm not doing this. But because he had the flexibility to just navigate, go off, burn off a bit of energy between the 5 minutes when it wasn't raining, and come back in, he then went back to being curious about the jigsaw and the exploration around the Jurassic period, lots of different things. And I was like, he would have never done that if I'd have hamstrung him into, you do this, you want to focus on dinosaurs. I don't think school and that curiosity and all the things that we've just talked about and creativity, it doesn't. But ultimately, the system that we've created is so full that it doesn't allow that flexibility and that choice and the deviation between different aspects of passion and drive. It doesn't allow that squiggly lines of innovation and exploration. It basically says, no, it's a straight line, and it's the same every single week and every single day. That's my challenge, I suppose, back into that. That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So, in terms of culturally, then you mentioned Iceland. You've mentioned some English words in there. Is there something that we're seeing in maybe non-English speaking countries or other types of countries that are helping us, that making us think about creativity, or making you think about creativity differently?
Yes, there are a bunch. I actually, which one should I pick? Okay, you want to go provocative? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Let's do North Korea. So I went to North Korea because I wanted to understand what can I learn about creativity from the least creative country on the planet, right? So I've been there twice now, and I interviewed North Koreans. And I need to say this as a disclaimer. In no way is this a support of the North Korean government, which is a terrible government. I'm talking about the culture, not the government. But so that's out of the way. But in North Korea, people think that they don't understand, they're not interested in creativity in North Korea. Actually, according to their philosophy, the Juji idea, what makes a human human is independence, self-reliance, and creativity. It's one of the 3 pillars of their culture. So they truly believe in creativity, but they look at creativity in a different way. They don't look at creativity like we do in the West, like the creative genius, right? They look at it as a collective thing, something we do between humans. Like we look at communication. You can't communicate in a vacuum. You need to communicate with someone else. They look at creativity as something that happens between people, not inside one person. They don't believe in creativity as an individual skill. And that just changes. They have a saying in North Korea, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals big 1. That's the saying. If you have a piece of clay, you have another piece of clay, you combine it, you have a big piece of clay. So creativity is what happens between people, not in people. And you look at that way, it changes what creativity is. And I like to do the comparison. If Alfred Nobel would have gone to North Korea, the Nobel Prize would not say, here's $1 million to the most creative person in medicine this year. It would say, here's $1 million to the most creative person in medicine last year, but you have to give away $500,000 to everyone who helped you become a Nobel Prize winner. You see the difference? Like your parents, your first teacher, whoever made you a Nobel Prize, you never became a Nobel Prize winner in a vacuum. Someone helped you become it. Creativity is not an individual skill. It's a creative collective skill. I like that approach.
I liken this to a lot of the conversation around collective genius by the work by Professor Linda Hill. And I think creativity, genius, it's all intertwined. I think it's a terminology that we attach to it. So if we focus on exactly the same, but ultimately people see creativity and genius as an Einstein. how many Einsteins have actually existed? I'm sure there's some crazy intelligent people in this world, but they haven't ever got there on their own. And ultimately, that is one instant in thousands where actually creativity coming together of dropping something, lifting it up and coming together, the collective is actually the platform that we want to build rather than putting one person on a stage and pretending that it's like exams. And I know that we're kind of spinning around everything in terms of the ability for a learner to sit there in silence in a silo in an exam hall on their own, if they don't know the answer and they can't think of "Oh, what we were having a conversation about and everything else, the ability to sit there for an extra hour and that thought to then go, this is coming to him. Why shouldn't they be able to then spin off and go, can I just pick your brains because you said something yesterday? And can I just, what? And ultimately, it's that collective element of that we're just lacking by individual silo. We do it so much, not just in the UK, generally, when we say, don't discuss because that's cheating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, It's not cheating. It's the real world. The world is ambiguous. I literally have never done anything on my own. Generally, I would say, in terms of my career pathway, there has been so many people that have helped me, guide me, and I have learned from, and also they've learned from me, regardless of age, diversity, thinking, anything else. And I just think that is such an important thing, isn't it? You know, that collective element that we just often ignore. Because the right beginning of this conversation was creativity, individual, or you've either got it or you haven't. You either like school or you don't. It was talk about insular person one rather than the collective.
Yeah, and you mentioned Einstein, but Einstein wasn't Einstein all by himself either. He also had a bunch of people helping him become Einstein. Right. I don't know if actually this is true because I heard it a long time ago. I haven't been able to confirm it later, but I heard once someone told me about, I was speaking at a conference for teachers, and they had come up, a Swedish school had created a school with no teachers, no subjects, and the students in Sweden, you can choose your school. So a lot of the students who picked that school were students who didn't want to go to school, so they were tired of school, right? So they got the worst students. And in the beginning, nothing happened. They just skipped school. No one cared. But after a while, they got bored. And then they said, someone have said, maybe we should create like help some kids in Africa. So they decided to help build a school in Africa. And then they realized, shit, if we're going to do this, we need to learn like finance. We need to learn English. So they went back and got the teacher. Can you teach us English? Can you teach us finance? And at the end of that school, at the end when they graduated, they actually went to Africa and built a school. And they were there presenting this idea that what the students did when it was driven by their own energy and collectively coming up with what they wanted to do. And one person in the audience lifted their hand up and said, yeah, that's all great. But did they learn anything?
and I just want to hark back to that collective, not on your own, lifting the ladder up for the people, laying the ladder down for the people. It's taking. Interestingly, we're releasing a trends booklet. I'm not going to give too much away, but at the Edufuturist Uprising that we have an event every summer. This one's in Liverpool this year in June, and in fact, everything that you've talked about today has come up in all in the trends that are there about a village that brings a child up, about it being human, about leaving the ladder down for people to make sure you bring other people with you, and I think what really lands for me though, as you may know, you may not know that I wrote a book called The Ideas Guy about just over 18 months ago, and it wasn't about me being an ideas guy. It's about other people that I've learned from, some famous, some not so famous, some alive, some not alive, some controversial, some not and just like what were the ideas that I got from them. But you also wrote a book about ideas, didn't you? And I love it because it's called The Ideas Book, and this is where I first found out about you actually. And then I went onto Amazon. I thought, I'm gonna have a look at what somebody else has written about ideas. And tell us a little bit about that book, because I think it's quite unique, right?
It is. It's not unique, but it's not. And basically, when I wrote the idea book, I wanted to write a book about creativity, but I also wanted the book in itself to be creative. So most creativity books looks the same, right? So a bit of a paradox there. So I decided to make a book that is 50% book and 50% notebook. So On the left side, you can read about creativity, and on the right side, you can write down the ideas you get when you read the book. So, and when you're done with it, it's your idea book because it's full of your own ideas. And people have used it to plan weddings and start businesses and all kinds of funny, interesting examples of how people use the idea book. So that's a great. But the funny story of it is that I was doing a speech yesterday, and I was mentioning the idea book, and I asked the audience, why is this a great idea to combine a book and a notebook into one? And someone said, oh, you only have to write half a book, which is true.
Well,
But people-
we've just written a book together, so if we'd have written
there you
half
go.
of it, that would have been a much better
That's
idea.
that's the manifesto. That's the second book, Ben. Literally write a half a book and just leave spaces for notes.
Exactly.
Yes,
Maybe I should
very good.
do one with only blank pages next time, even easier. But then what people don't realize is that the true brilliance of that idea is that by making it a notebook, I'm not selling it to companies on the budget for books, which is extremely small. I'm selling it on the budget of stationery, which is huge. So I've sold 250,000 copies of this book by selling it as a notebook to companies, not by selling it as a book. And that just shows by designing a book slightly differently, you can get a huge effect. And I use that to exemplify that that's what creativity is doing something slightly different to huge benefit for yourself and society. So it's a good example of what I'm talking about.
Ben, just quickly, I'm just going to just mute myself and send an email to the editors and just say, can we add 5 pages at the end that are aligned and sell it as stationery? Look at houses for parents as a step in. But I absolutely love that. It just links to we have our uprising, which is our awards. We talk about the future of education such a long period of time, but we want to talk about those wonderful organisations that are laying the breadcrumbs to show people how to lead the way. And often people come into us and saying, I can't attend because my school or my organisation can't pay for something that is an awards evening. They can't do that. So we got CPD accreditation by an organisation and said, well, you can't pay for CPD. So ultimately it was about actually how do we make it inclusive? And I think that's the same for the book. It's not about selling more copies. It's making it more inclusive when people potentially can't afford it themselves or won't, but the businesses can pay for on their behalf. It's a way that actually can fund inclusivity and access to the learning rather than it just being about a number. 250,000 is amazing, but actually it's just become more inclusive for everybody by doing so. So yeah, I just think how
we also did one version. It's not in. I'm not selling it. I'm not promoting it because it's not in. It's out of stock. But we did one version was called the Idea Book for Parents, and this is funny because this is how you write a book without writing a book at all. I went out to my newsletter and said, do you have a funny story about your child doing or saying something in a creative way? Because kids can do this, right? And if your story is included in the book, we'll pay you 50 euros, right? And we were overwhelmed. All these amazing stories, and we put them into a book, and then half of the pages are still white. So you read funny stories about kids, and the white pages are there, so that as a parent, whenever your child says something funny, instead of saying, oh, I should have written that down, you write it down into that book, and now you have collected all those, because now you're encouraging your kid to think differently, right? That was the idea. But here's the funny twist on that one. When we got all these people to send in our stories, we gave them 50 quid or 50 euros. And on average, they bought books for 1,000. I mean, for 100, because mom, my kid's story is in a book, and they bought one for grandma, one for grandpa, and so on. So we actually made money on the people who send us copies to the book. I think one of the first authors to make money, right, and didn't write a book, and we made money even before we started selling it.
This. I think you're like, never mind studying creativity. These are like great ideas. Like put half of your book, make it blank pages. Get people to submit, pay them, and then they'll actually buy more of the books themselves. Like great idea. And I think everyone, I say everyone, most of the people who'll be listening or watching this podcast will be coming from either classroom teacher, education leader. They might be working in an edtech organization, but they've got some vested interest in education. And so we're circling back to that piece that I love that you don't think schools are killing creativity. They've got part to do with it, but it's not just on them. I wonder if you could maybe talk to us about and our listeners about that core philosophy about because you said, and I've read this in lots of things that you've put out there, is that the world improves when people reach creative potential. So how can we help educators help young people reach their creative potential?
Yeah. Okay. So I gave you a story about my mother was a teacher. So let me share a story about my father, who was also a teacher. And both my mom and my dad, I like to ask people, do you have a teacher you remember from school? I like to ask that questions in my speeches. And everyone raises their hand. But then I ask, why do you remember them? And there are three answers. What do you think the three answers are?
They inspired me to I think that'll be one. I imagine that they cared for me and like looked at me and supported me when other people didn't. Maybe I was seen by them.
Yeah.
Like, what else could it be, Steve? What have I missed?
Mine was just they allowed me to explore what my passion was, which was sport.
So you can. So the three are the first one is he or she loved his subject. Like that's why I love history, because my teacher loved history. And the second one is he saw me, inspired me, or she, something like that, right? Or he was just so much. She was just so fun. And the third one is he bullied me. He put me down. She put me down. Something like that. So those are the three teachers you remember. So my parents were both teachers. People come up to me when I'm an adult and said, I had your parents in school as a teacher, and not because they were the bullying type, because my mom, because she loved teaching, and my father, because he was a very creative teacher. When he was going to teach geography to us, we were in a small village in Sweden. We're going to learn how to read a map. He went to the local airplane club, that is tiny Cessna, and said, "Can we put the class inside the plane?" And we flew over our whole village so we could hold out the paper and look down and see that our houses actually do look like little squares when you look straight up from an airplane. And suddenly we understood what a map was. That's the kind of teacher he was. And he was also a music teacher. And people would ask him all the time, so how do you raise a musician? And my father said, you can teach any child to play an instrument. That's what I do. You put your fingers like this and you blow in the hole and out comes sound. But the only way to make someone a musician is through inspiration. So like Michael Jackson is Michael Jackson because he looked at all the Fred Astaire and Frank Sinatra and all of that when he was growing up, and he was all sucked into that. So yeah, inspiration literally means to breathe in. Like I'm a huge fan of etymology. Inspire means to breathe in, right? So if you get people to breathe in the energy of a subject, then that's so curiosity and inspiration, the two most important things if you want people to become more creative.
To breathe in. Yeah, absolutely. I breathed in. Primary school just didn't feel like learning to me. Probably I was never there. That was the interesting bit of like literally I was always away and outside of the classroom. I still progressed. I'm guessing I still did what I needed to do against common denominators and tests, but yeah, I focused down on my passion, and that drove me. It changed. I broke my leg badly into secondary school, and ultimately it was very different in terms of that approach. So yeah, it allowed me to breathe in my passion and inspire me in terms of my ability for sport and everything else. So I just so many questions I just want to ask, but I suppose, how does your philosophy around that thing of allowing each individual learner and person to become their best creative or reaching their potential, whatever that looks like, what does that look like as an exploration? Is that something that is still in your thoughts, or you consider and is changing all of the time? How does the world improve when everybody reaches potential and creative potential specifically?
Well, the funny thing with the word potential is you can never, actually as a human, you can never reach it, right? How can someone reach their human potential? Of course they can't. Like, has anyone reached their full potential? No, they haven't. So Einstein, amazing, but he could still become better in many ways, right? So potential is a never-ending journey. So that's why I like to define myself as an explorer and not as an expert. Because an expert, it's kind of has come to the end somehow. It implies that you have all the answers. An explorer, per definition, does not have the answers. He only asks the questions. So when you feel you're going somewhere, that when you feel like I interviewed a musician once in Indonesia, and he's one of the most famous in Indonesia, and he does film music, and he composes, he performs, and he's 65 years old. And I said, how do you define yourself as a producer, as a composer, as a musician? What's your, how do you define yourself? And he says, I define myself as a student of music. And I think that's so brilliant, because he was such a curious learning, and like you could see the sparkle in that, even though he was 65 years old, right? A student of music, I'm going to study music until I die, right? That's the mindset you need.
That is it. And that's the lifelong learning. That's been bastardized as a term, hasn't it? Lifelong learning. But realistically, that's what we're saying. We're saying the curious people haven't reached the end goal. We talk on the podcast and talk about the work of around infinite games and whatnot in that space, and how we're playing infinite games rather than play that James Carse work around education isn't a finite game. It's not something where you reach the end of it and therefore you've completed. And interestingly, when you talked about being an explorer, we had Howell Roberts on the podcast, episode 262, as I was looking at it, because I was looking at it earlier, and he talked about how teachers are like Sherpas, and the design is that they guide people. And then it's almost like they take that step back and allow them to see the view, and then they become an explorer themselves, don't they? And that's, if you think about it, where you're talking about great teachers, they are those people who inspire an exploration and want you to, and then give you the skills and the tools to then continue to explore. And then it's the pride thing. I saw this recently. I was talking to a friend of the podcast, Steve Downing. You're probably listening to this. He'll quite like it. And I said, somebody gave me a leg up into thinking about educational technology and innovation. Somebody gave me opportunities to speak, opportunities to do some stuff. And because of that, I've been able to speak all around the world, been able to write books, been able to do these cool things, doing what we're doing here as well. But then my responsibility as if is not just to rest on the laurels and think, all right, I've achieved, it's to keep learning, but also it's to give that opportunity and to support others. And I'm now going to conferences where people that we've invested in, people that we've given time to, are now speaking at, and you're going, this is it. This is where you feel like you might have been passed, and think about coaches in football. A lot of them, I'm not just in football, but a lot in sport, a lot of them didn't make it as to the pinnacle, but they have helped other people become like the best of the best of the best, because they allowed themselves to come out. And is there something there around ego and about letting go of that ego and pride space?
Yeah, of course. I'm going to comment on it. I just want to say, I got an idea when you were talking, because lifelong learning has become almost like it's kind of lost its meaning, because we hear it so much, we don't really think about what it means. Maybe we should start pushing lifelong curiosity instead, because it kind of triggers something else in your brain when you hear it. But definitely, I mean, if you interview enough creative people, and I've interviewed thousands, you will notice that like the 0.1% most, they all talk about getting rid of the ego. Like creativity is reducing or eliminating ego, because then that's when you get those brilliant ideas, those Nobel Prize winning ideas. When you don't come up with the idea comes to you, right? The best idea I've ever had in my life, I had it as a nightmare. I can't take credit for it. It came in a dream, but there was no ego involved. And I interviewed a sculptor in Hong Kong, and he talked about mortal ideas and divine ideas. So mortal ideas is things you come up with your conscious brain. Like, I'm going to make pancakes for breakfast. Like, that's nothing, a conscious idea. But mortal ideas are ideas that come to you in meditation, in dreams, in your subconscious brain. And he said divine ideas are always beautiful. They always have a beautiful message in them. I think that's an interesting observation. And and he said, my goal is to increase the amount of divine ideas I have in my life. And after hearing him, I'm doing the same.
Well, interestingly, sorry, Steve, I know you're going to come in here. Stephen Pressfield, in his brilliant book, if people haven't read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, he talks about the muse and how almost like ideas, you don't have ideas, you just said they're given to you, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be spiritual and in that space.
No.
I think it personally is that, but there's this something in the universe, something that happens where at the right moment they collide, and if you're willing and the vessel is open without being super like deep and philosophical. But I think
no, we should be. Why not? I mean,
I think so. But I know that I don't want to put that on everybody.
Why on earth would we not go there, right? Those are the most beautiful ideas. Okay, one more etymology. Do you know what the etymology of creativity is? Of course, it's come from creator, which means God. But what if you go deeper? What does it mean? It means to give birth. And we call God the creator because he gives birth to everything. So creativity is to give birth to something, meaning it is the metaphor of like giving, like the giving of birth of a child is what we give birth to an idea. That's what we do. There's nothing more profound that we do as human beings than come up with those. And then the divine ideas, the ones that come to us, those are the most beautiful things we give birth to. Why on earth would we not go there?
I'm trying to think about how I step into the next bit, but ultimately I just want to continue to have these. I just think the problem is our definition of learning, if we go back to lifelong learning, is often a shackle of ultimately what education and school is. So people see it as like, if I said to us and I said, how many people have been to an adult class or a college or a formalized learning or somewhere recently, we'd probably not put our hands up at all. But if I said, has anybody learned anything new recently? Or anything, like Ben reads probably 5 books a day and often in the shower. It shows Ben's the cleanest person in the world. He doesn't like showers. He just likes reading books and it's his quiet time. But I think it's all of that thing of what does learning actually mean? And we go back to what our experience is, and that was in school, structure and all those kinds of things. But learning is curious, is lighting a fire, is, oh, that's really interesting. Let me just read the back of that packet. Let me just have a look at that. Then going on and doing a Google search or watching something on TV. It can be multiple things. And I think it's curiosity, creativity, learning all in one in terms of just what you've said. I think it's that. But it's the terminology we use, isn't it, that often turns people and switches people off.
Yeah. I don't think forgive me now. I got a little bit of a mind blank here, but I don't think I shared it. I want to give one more story from my parents. This time my mother. Because my mother, interrupt me if I already told this now, because I got blank brain. Anyway, my mother's, as I said, been a teacher for like 40 years. And I got kids very late in life. So I was like 40 years old when I became a parent, my first child. So I was already a creativity expert. So I went to my mom and said, I want to raise creative children. I'm an expert on creativity. I'm the creativity explorer. I don't know anything about kids. You've seen 100,000 kids. How do I raise a creative child? And she said this, never give the answer. When a child comes to you and asks you a question, don't give the answer. Every parent wants to give the answer. Every teacher gives the answer. Just don't give the answer. Just say, what do you think? That's the best advice I ever got as a parent. And I've used it on my kids and it works brilliantly. So they go like, Daddy, why is the moon yellow? Every other parent will start to explain the sun, reflection, blah, blah, blah. And I say, I don't know. What do you think? And now you're teaching, because children automatically ask questions. And that's a big thing of creativity. But creativity is not asking questions. Creativity is asking questions and finding the answer. And if we are always giving the answer to them, we're taking away half of what creativity is. So you say, what do you think? And they will say anything. They will stop and think, and they will say, because I think yellow is the favorite color of God. Okay, fine. Now they thought of an answer. Now you say, that's an interesting question, and you're right. Scientists think it's because the sun, and then you still give the answer. You just hold back for 20 seconds. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And it works on the small things too. Daddy, where's my bag? What do you think? They 90% of the time they know where it is.
I
I was just going
cannot
to say, as
not
a
jump
parent,
into
I
that.
think the challenge is speed and everything else. It's like, like I want my kids to learn how to put their shoes on, but if we're late for school, I'm quickly that I'll go, right, help me put your shoes on. But what I should do is allow the space, and you know what, say it's 2 minutes.
But in the long run, you're saving time because you're
Ah.
teaching your child to solve their own problems. So after a while, when they learn that, you're gonna wish you had more to do with your kids because they're solving other problems by themselves.
But that idea of like going question after question, if you look at some of the greatest thinkers of all time, they answered questions with questions. There's very rare, there's examples of, well, I won't go religious in that space, but almost always that was how that went. I used to be a religious studies philosophy teacher, so like my natural bent is to go into look into those people who went, hold on a minute, I don't want to answer the question. Like, what has that taught you? Interestingly, do we know the etymology of the word learning?
Oh, I wish I did. I do not. Sorry.
Well, I've done some digging on this. So it can mean one of two things. It's obviously about acquiring knowledge and studying. So we know that bit. But there is an old I don't know if it's Old English or it might even be beyond that, was around the idea of finding or following a track or trail. That's what, and I think interestingly about what we're talking about there is that taking people on trails and journeys, there's something really powerful around that as well, isn't there? That the whole idea of to learn, and interestingly, the word we've said this on the podcast before. Steve laughs at me because I go into Latin, but educator comes from the word educarium. It's to lead out or to draw out, doesn't it? And actually, if we're talking about learning being something that is about trails and tracks and that conversation, and we realize that the teacher's role then is to draw something out, and there's this guide and this Sherpa piece. I think there's loads to take from this, for educators and leaders in the space. That's the culture and the philosophy that we can kind of move into, and I want to ask one thing before we jump into quickfire, because we used to have quick, and I imagine your quickfire answers are going to be absolutely mint, by the way. But you're not allowed to ask us a question back if we ask you a question.
Why not?
That's the rules. No, I'm just kidding. But the phrase that we wanted to look at, and I'm probably going to bastardize it and say it really badly, so please forgive it. It's Kaitakusha. Is that how you say it? That's something
the
that
Japanese.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think our listeners will love what you've written about that.
Yes. So I was interviewing a creative director in Japan, and she mentioned this Japanese concept, which is kind of so. I love that you said that the learning was a path, right? But we need to also add. I'm as the creativity explorer, I also need to add the definition of explore, which is to venture into unknown territory in order to learn more about it, to go off the beaten path and go somewhere else. And this is the concept in Japan, where they have this idea that someone who goes and learns something about something that is new, and we call it a pioneer or an explorer, but they have a different word, and it literally translates into cultivating the future. That's the definition. So someone who goes and looks at something new, let's say AI in education, someone who goes and learns something from an AI expert to see how that can be used in education, but not just as a pioneer. The idea is to see the new thing and then go back to the rest of the group, whatever the group is, your school or your friends or whatever, and then teach people what you saw in the future so that they also can. So you're cultivating the future. That is it's a small difference, but it's a big difference. Pioneer, by the way, is a terrible word to use. Pioneer means cannon fodder in French. That's what it meant. The soldiers that go first and get killed, that's pioneers. You don't want to be pioneers.
Wow, I did not know that. I love words. Like, I'm a nerd about
Me
words.
too.
so me and you are probably like these ideas about words. So yeah, Steve, save us for being nerds.
Let me just on Skyscanner flights to Stockholm. So absolutely, that's what's been happening during this time. So we always finish the podcast. I'm going to go back to my OD comments as well. I could have this conversation all night, I'll be honest, but we have to give back the time and make sure that we're wrapping up. So quick fire. I will ask first, then Ben, and then I will go last. So first question is: schools would judge like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
Appreciation, as in you give tip to a good teacher. Now you give tip to a good waiter. Now you would give tip to a good teacher.
So, what is the biggest myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
I'd say that when they hear imagination is more important than knowledge, they think there's a contradiction. Einstein said imagination is even more important than knowledge. It doesn't mean knowledge is not important. It means imagination is even more important. It's not a conflict. They support each other.
The final one is, if a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
Why do you want to go to school?
Yes, he's answered a question with a question, and we have got these quick fires absolutely belting. What an absolutely brilliant set of quick fire questions. But also, if this is rich for people who are listening and watching to think about creativity, think about curiosity, think about what learning is, think about our role as educators, as guides. I love how beautiful it's been talking about your parents and the inspiration they are for you and for others, and how you've learned from other people. And I think for our listeners and watchers of this, other people need to hear more and more about what you're doing. So, what's the best way that people can find out about you, Fredrik? I know we'll put some links in the show notes, but tell us a little bit about what they can do.
I don't Google my name or Google the Creativity Explorer. I shall come up, hopefully.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Fredrik. Thank you for joining us from Stockholm. And maybe, just maybe, we will meet. I've never been to Sweden, so let's make that happen. We can have a real life, in-depth conversation. But thank you so much.
Come to my island. Come on.
Yeah, we'd love to. Love to. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you everybody for watching. What I will say is that if you have not yet got your tickets for Uprising 2026 in Liverpool on the 25th of June, please do. The link is in the show notes. You will not be disappointed. There aren't going to be many tickets left by the time this goes out. We are super excited for all the cool things that are happening. So yeah, thank you.